When it comes to China policy, what do Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush have in common? The answer, when running for president, all of them targeted China, and all of them subsequently learned a painful lesson. Past experience has shown that when they get to the White House, candidates who have pledged to get tough on China in order to win votes consistently run into a stark reality. Managing the U.S. China relationship is a lot more complicated than it appeared on the campaign trail. Reagan was a conservative and a strong supporter of Taiwan. His opponent was Jimmy Carter, who had severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan and normalized relations with Beijing in 1979. During the campaign, Reagan hinted he'd restore ties with the island and increase arms sales.
What Reagan as a presidential candidate did was he was arguing that we had to reopen the issues that had been the subject of the negotiation, the difficult negotiation that resulted in the agreements that produced the diplomatic relationship. And what he found when he became president was you couldn't walk the horse back.
Reagan only learned that lesson, however, after Beijing hinted that it would downgrade relations with the United States unless Washington limited arms sales to Taiwan. Eventually, Reagan agreed to a new accord, setting limits where none existed before. This paved the way for an expansion of Sino-American ties, symbolized by Reagan's own visit to China in 1984.
I think he discovered when he came into office that he needed to be able to work with China, and I think that there were people within his administration who recognized that trying to renegotiate normalization under those circumstances was simply not a viable foreign policy.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
A decade later, Bill Clinton took office. In the interim, Sino-American relations had been shaken by the Chinese government's bloody suppression of pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square. Clinton denounced the administration of the first President Bush for, quote, coddling the butchers of Beijing. He promised to put human rights on the top of the agenda by linking progress on the issue to the continuation of MFN, China's most favored nation trading status. Kenneth Lieberthal was an Asian expert on Clinton's National Security Council.
I think it was a very steep learning curve. President Clinton, when he was elected, really had no serious experience in foreign affairs. And I think his first several years in office, he did very badly on this. For example, he used the annual vote on renewal of what was then called most favored nation trading status with China as a club. Telling the Chinese that they had to meet various kinds of benchmarks, especially in human rights, in order for the president to agree to this annual renewal.
Beijing, not surprisingly, pushed back.
There was a lot of strain in our economic relationship and in the overall political relationship during the period when we had the linkage between human rights considerations and our trade relationship with China.
When China wouldn't yield, Clinton eventually abandoned the link between MFN and human rights.
Chinese ended up calling his bluff and proved that he was bluffing. And so we did renew it every year, and the president finally came around to understanding that it really did not make sense for U.S. interests for him to go out of his way unnecessarily to increase tensions with China.
The result, in his second term, the president visited China amid talk about a strategic partnership between the two countries. During the 2000 campaign, that led to criticism from candidate George W. Bush, who characterized China not as a partner, but a strategic competitor.
In the year 2000, when George W. Bush talked about China as a strategic competitor, and 3 months into the administration, we had a showdown with Chinese over the shooting down of an EP-3 plane. And its crash landing on Hainan Island.
That crisis, when a U.S. EP-3 reconnaissance plane was forced to land in China after colliding with a Chinese military aircraft, highlighted the dangers of a Sino-American confrontation. After 9/11, however, Mr. Bush, preoccupied by the war on terror, changed signals and made the maintenance of good U.S.-China ties a top priority.
We want a candid, constructive, and cooperative relationship with the People's Republic of China.
What are the prospects for such a relationship under a President McCain or a President Obama? Coming up, the candidates and their key advisors on dealing with China.